One day, when a woman can get the same start as a man, can bring home the same paycheck, can be represented as much in her government, can get her turn to be in charge, then she'll look back at what you're doing today and say, thank you.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for our 7th annual International Women's Day event. Across the globe, humanity is moving into a very exciting time in our history where the world is transitioning from expecting to requiring diversity, equity, and inclusion. When either is missing, it is glaring. Personally, my dream is of a time where the need for an isolated day for recognition for women's contributions and achievements is no more. Admittedly, as a collective society, we still have more to do on our journey. We're all here today, men and women alike, because everyone plays a role in forging gender parity. Gender balance is not solely a women's issue. While we applaud Cheryl and Nell for the inspiration to lean in, at this stage, all of us should have gone from leaning to falling to frankly being all in. Perhaps March 8th should be reserved for vigorously debating who's responsible for cleaning up all the glass left over from the many broken ceilings. I digress. We have a great event in store for you today with 2 incredibly inspiring keynote speakers with compelling stories. First, we'll hear from Katya Andresen, Chief Digital and Analytics Officer at the Cigna Group. Then we'll hear from Tiffany M, Senior Vice President, Political and Industry Affairs at the Consumer Technology Association. You're really going to want to dial in and take notes. Did I mention that they're very good? Facilitating their introductions, Q&A, as well as some brief reflection will be Ricoh's Executive Vice President, Deputy General Manager, Donna Venable, and Ricoh's Chief Marketing Officer, Lauren Sallata. We'll also have a call to action from Janet Gillespie, our Vice President of Marketing Operations. But before we jump in, I want to introduce Carsten Bruhn, our President and CEO of North America. Carsten is passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and his philosophy that everyone is a leader is so applicable to our conversation today. On a personal note, I can tell you that Carsten is not just passionate, but purposeful, simply meaning that there are actions behind his commitment, and those actions are the exact same when no one's looking. So without further ado, I'll transition over to Carsten.
Thank you very much, Michael, and I very much appreciate that introduction. And I really appreciate that I have the opportunity also to join this great event. You know, earlier this morning, I was actually with one of our customers and I saw similar events going on. So it's just great to see how the world is coming together to make sure we all speak this voice today. And I'm also thrilled, to welcome so many of you today. Our valued team members, our customers, but also our very important partners. It's a common knowledge that the path to women's equality has been a long and very challenging kind of journey. As Michael shared, the world expects inclusivity, and yet, as a society, our journey is still underway. Unconscious bias, as maybe some of you have seen even in social media, is something I'm extremely passionate about. And it's something I really encourage people to call out because it's kind of a silent undercurrent that impacts our behaviors and also the way we make decisions. And there are many examples of gender bias, both conscious, but also unconscious. And it each impacts women. We must all recognize stereotypes, acknowledge, and also address our biases and call out for inequality whenever we see it occur. It is so critical for our future. And especially you'll hear in Ricoh here in North America, it's something that is a critical part of our culture. I'm particularly passionate about this year's theme, Embrace Equity. Here at Ricoh, as I said, we have what we call our culture of excellence. And it's a culture where everybody matters. And for us to work together successfully, we must all respect, appreciate, and also support each other. And we must make sure that everyone is given an equal and incredible, opportunity. I'm also very pleased, as Michael talked about, to welcome Katya and also Tiffany here today. An important each of our guests have in common is their passion and support for the development, success, and also opportunities for women, whether it be driving, advancements in women's health, training, development, mentorship, and leadership opportunities, or simply advocating as an ally for diversity, equity, and also inclusion. They both embody what it means to embrace equity. It's just something that I really look forward to listen to. We have seen it in our company. When you create a very diverse and inclusive environment and you really ask everybody to raise their voice, that's when really magic happens. So I really look forward to listen. As you hear what I know will be an inspirational stories, but also very powerful messages today, I really encourage you to think about how you too will embrace equity. So on behalf of Ricoh North America's executive management team, I would like to thank you to kind of joining us here today. So with that in mind, I will now hand it over to Donna Venable, that first of all will do a kind of a brief reflection on how are we really doing here within Ricoh North America. And then Donna will also introduce our first keynote speaker. So over to you, Donna, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Carsten. And I am so excited to be here today. As Michael said, this recognition of women today is something that's important, but I too look forward to a day where we won't have to separate out a day to focus on opportunities for women, but instead opportunities for all will be available. Now, as Carsten said, I thought I would share just a couple of pieces of information about where we, Ricoh North America, are on our journey. About 44% of Ricoh North American's total hires in FY22 were women. And interestingly, of those women, 54% were millennials. Now, 34% of our total workforce across North America are women with about 10 years of tenure. 31% of Ricoh North American's management team are women. Now, our Ricoh Foundation will again this year make donations to code.org on behalf of each of our guest speakers and Ricoh North America in support of their mission. More about that in just a few moments. Now, I also agree with everything that Carsten and Michael said about our journey and where we're headed. Collectively, everyone everywhere can strive for women's equality. And in post-pandemic environment that we're all living in today, we find ourselves in a situation where it's more important than ever to focus on equality. I'm often asked about the difference between equality and equity, and it's important to note that they're not the same. Equality means the state of being equal, but equity adds the additional element of fairness or justice. For example, if all students have access to their public school's computer lab with the same number of computers and hours of operation, that would provide equal resources for all students. But if some students also have access to the internet and computers at home, while their peers in lower income neighborhoods do not, then we have to make adjustments to ensure that all students have the same opportunity. So those students without the internet at home would need access to additional computers and options for extended lab hours in order to provide a truly equitable solution. As we look for ways that we can embrace equity, it's important to look at all the trends in society and across business. Each year, McKinsey & Company publishes a report called Women in the Workplace. They survey more than 400,000 people around the world about their workplace experiences. And if you're not familiar with the report, I highly recommend taking a look at it. What I found fascinating about this year's trends is one that they call the Great Breakup. The pandemic changed what women want from their companies, including things like growing importance of opportunity, flexibility, employee well-being, and of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Women and people everywhere are looking for balance in their lives, and well-being and mental health are at the forefront of their decisions. Now, I know this is something that our next guest feels strongly about, and at Ricoh, we agree. We have to shine a light on well-being, not just for the sake of awareness, but for the health of our team members, our organizations, and our cultures. And with that, I have the great honor of introducing our first guest speaker today. Katya Andresen is Chief Digital and Analytics Officer at the Cigna Group. In this position, she leads digital strategy and data and analytics for the company's lines of business, as well as cross-enterprise experiences to drive affordability, predictability, and simplicity in healthcare. Prior to her time with Cigna, Katya drove experience and innovation in financial services as Senior Vice President at Capital One, served as CEO of Cricket Media, and held executive roles for several mission-focused technology companies. Please join me in welcoming our first keynote speaker, Katya Andresen.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for the warm introduction today. I thought I would start out today with an embarrassing story about myself. That always gets everyone's attention. I think it also exhibits a growth mindset, and maybe it'll make a sympathetic audience of you too. So the story I'm about to tell is a story about vitality, or actually what happens for working women when we don't attend to the critical ingredients of our own vitality. And so I'm going to start today with a story about baking, since I'm talking about ingredients here. So let me set the stage. It's a few years ago, and it's the eve of St. Patrick's Day, so March here in the United States. And I found myself in my kitchen very late at night with a butter knife in my hand, and I was prying off the hardened swirls of green frosting on some store-bought cupcakes. And I was doing this with sort of the steely precision of a surgeon. And why was I doing this? Well, I was replacing the store-applied icing with some other store-bought frosting that I dyed green and put on rather sloppily, because I felt that once I threw away the plastic store containers and put the cupcakes on a plate, they would look homemade. And I would bring them to my daughter's school for her birthday the next morning. She's a St. Patrick's Day baby, and no one would be the wiser. And there's actually a work of fiction that starts like this. I don't know if any of you have read Allison Pearson's, I don't know how she does it, The Life of Kate Reddy, Working Mother. But that book starts with the heroine distressing mince pies ahead of her daughter's school carol concert. Now, that's a posher, more British version of my situation, but it's very similar. And the character Kate Reddy asks at the opening of this book, how did I get here? And could someone please tell me that? And that's a good question. Over the years, I have looked back at this night in the kitchen that I am confessing to you about and asking myself, how did I get there? I was a single mom at the time, working full time. I was in a bit of a writing panic over a book contract I had. I was going through a divorce, and this whole thing was a recipe for the opposite of vitality, right? And I know the story makes me sound a little bit crazy. That's why it's embarrassing. But I have to say, when I tell it, most women that I know have some version of this story, some kind of contorted effort to be everything, to do everything. And I think I was trying to be some kind of top working mother achiever in my own mind. And if I could go back in time, I would really like to tell my younger self and all of us that we should be freed from paying the price for this kind of recognition. I'd say to myself, leave those cupcakes as they are, let yourself be as you are. There will be times in your career when you're going to need to fake it till you make it, but this is not one of them. Don't fake it, don't make it, don't bake those cupcakes, bring them as is, straight from the store, because our work does not need to be performative. It needs to be substantive, right? But we worry a lot about the judgment of others, and it really gets in the way of our vitality. And speaking of performative, the other personal anecdote I wanted to share was I get a lot of emails telling me that I've been shortlisted for awards and cover stories in magazines. And before you get too impressed by that, I've never ever heard of any of these awards or magazines. They all sound rather dubious, like the Women Achiever Award or Influential Women to Watch. And when you read the emails I get about this, all it's going to take to seal the deal for me to get that is a sponsorship fee of like $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000. And I think it's this kind of madness, right, that had me prying the frosting lids off of cupcakes, that I was trying to attain some kind of perfect standard and worry about how I appeared to others. And, the greatest women I know, and the ones that I want to talk about today, they deserve an award, but they don't need one. And so today we're recognizing women. That's great. But as we heard in introductions, I sure hope this won't be necessary at some point because we women have bigger concerns on our minds, right, than awards and recognition, like growing our capacity to pursue our lives with health and strength and energy. We're vital women who are seeking vitality. And we know life isn't a cover story. It's a work in progress. And that work is not easy for any of us, particularly over the last 2 years. And that's what I want to talk about today is how do we get to true vitality? And not the kind that's, posed or that's a sort of false sense of celebration, but what we all really need and deserve, which is a sense of well-being. And we've been studying vitality at Cigna, and I wanted to share some findings from a study, our first ever North Vitality Index study that's going to be coming out soon on how concerned we should be about the state of vitality among women. Vitality, I would define as pursuing life with health and strength and energy. Vitality is not a fixed state of being, right? It's an active approach to living that it can be improved, it can be depleted. And what we're seeing is there's too much depletion happening right now. And so I wanted to talk a little bit today about what are the causes of that, and what do we need to do to invest in our emotional, physical, and financial well-being? And I'm going to particularly focus on our emotional and mental well-being today. So let me talk a little bit about what the study says. So first off, it says that working women experience lower vitality, resilience, and greater loneliness, and face challenges specifically in emotional and financial well-being. They struggle with feeling competent and do not feel as autonomous as working men. Working women are not in good health. Working women are not in as good health as working men. So we do not have equity there. And the biggest gap is in mental health. Working women are significantly more likely to have clinical depression and anxiety, and they are less likely than working men to seek counseling and therapy. Working women tend to have a different working arrangement than working men. They have fewer hours, smaller companies, more fully remote jobs than working men. That allows us to enjoy, in some cases, a better work-life balance as a result of these differences, but it also means we're less likely to have access to advantageous health and wellness benefits at work or to earn as much. Women are less likely to leave their job in the next year than working men, according to our research. Likely, this is probably due to the post-pandemic return to work. Their job satisfaction, though, and satisfaction with work benefits may lead to less loyalty in those jobs, and fewer working women see themselves with the same employer 3 years from now. And the last thing I want to share is working mothers experience higher vitality than working non-mothers, but they experience different challenges that could impact their long-term vitality and health. And so this is a very concerning list. And we know that a lot of this depletion, it was catalyzed by the pandemic, but these dynamics have been there for some time. And so how do we get to a place where we have more equity in vitality? So let's think about the same body of research and where we see a difference between vitality. So where are women feeling high vitality versus low vitality? And what does that tell us about how we might improve things? And so some of the differentiators that we found in this research were having access to health benefits and wellness programs at work, regularly visiting a healthcare provider for checkups, minimizing screen time, I need to work on that one, spending time outdoors or in nature, eating a nutritious diet, getting high quality sleep, and physical activity. Okay, well, so that's a good list, but not all of us have the privilege of being able to act upon all of those things. And so before I sort of talk a little bit about acting upon these types of things, I want to say it's very important that those of us who do have privilege and are able to advocate and have a voice for other women, that we should do the work of voicing the necessity that all women have access to benefits like these and time to pursue their vitality. Until we get to a place where everyone has the equal ability to pursue this kind of investment in themselves, we are not going to be in a place where we have equity and vitality. And when we don't have equity in vitality, we are not in a good place as a society. So I talked a little bit about awards today, right? I talked a little bit about my efforts to be a perfect working mother, which were always doomed to failure. But because I felt that there was a certain level of vitality I should be able to pull off, right? And rather than investing in myself, I was thinking of what I was out there doing and giving to everyone else all the time. And so what I want to talk about sort of as the final part of these remarks before we go to questions is, how do we support each other in this journey? And particularly we women, what can we do for each other to give each other the space and support in investing in our own well-being? Because I think this permission to invest in ourselves is something we don't always give each other. And I think we often feel that showing that we need that or exhibiting the vulnerability that reveals we're not perfect can make us feel pretty uncomfortable in the workplace. And so I think it's really important that we support each other in this investment in ourselves and in this pursuit of vitality. So I'm going to share 5 things that have been personally really helpful to me and to me as a leader. And so the first one I want to talk about is reducing the stigma of being imperfect and making it okay to not be okay. There's a reason that I started with an embarrassing story about myself today. And that is because I think it's really important for me to model to others, particularly on an occasion like International Women's Day, that, we don't all feel vitality all the time. Sometimes we are depleted. Sometimes we are burned out. Sometimes we've stretched ourselves so thin that we're doing something crazy, like faking homemade cupcakes. And, I did that because I felt, it wasn't okay not to be okay. And I have since realized that in doing that and trying to pull that off, as a leader, I was doing a colossal disservice to the women on my team and to my colleagues. Because what that kind of thing does is it doesn't give other people room to be human beings too. And if I don't model being an imperfect human being and making the space for others to be equally vulnerable, then we cannot build the trust you need in a team, and nor can we create a sense of psychological safety. Psychological safety means you feel you can show up as your authentic self at work, that you can bring everything that makes you unique and take risks and not be penalized for being who you are and having failure when you take a risk that didn't work out. And I think that without psychological safety, there's no innovation. But you can't have that psychological safety without making room for imperfection. And so I really want to say it's okay if everyone doesn't feel vitality all the time. It sounds obvious, but how often do we feel that we should be celebrating perfect women and women who are the women to watch and so on and so forth? And I just think that negates or it prevents the kind of honest conversations we should be having about vitality. So that's the first one. The second one is naming how we're doing and encouraging others to do the same. I think there's incredible power in sharing our emotional states with each other, inviting others to do the same. And sometimes I think we struggle to do that well. Most people only can identify 3 emotions: bad, sad, and glad. And sometimes when we're able to better talk about where we are, in our work as a team, we can do a much better job understanding each other. And while this might sound very soft and mushy, and I don't know, maybe even overly feminine, to be encouraging these types of labeling of situations or emotions very openly, I will tell you a story about why I think that's really powerful. When I was leading during coronavirus, like many of you, during the COVID lockdown, when everyone was sent home, I suddenly had 17,000 people sent home. And it was very important to make room for others to talk about how it was going for them. And in the midst of all of that, Adam Grant, who is a wonderful organizational psychologist at Wharton, he named what many people were feeling at that time, which is a state of languishing. And languishing is just not really thriving. It's a kind of burnout. And by putting a very clear label or characterizing what many were going through, he did an incredible service to many of us in being able to come together to understand each other, understand ourselves, and understand to move forward together through that moment. So I think that that's a really good example of the power of that. The other thing I want to say about number 3 on my list about supporting each other in our mental health and our well-being is to recognize that everyone copes as they uniquely need to cope. For example, there's a lot of talk about burnout, but burnout is not this one concept that everyone goes through in the same way. There's actually many different forms of burnout, and each require kind of different mitigation. Like one form of burnout is exhaustion. Self-care can be helpful with that. Another form of burnout is feeling lonely or alienated or cynical. Right? Connecting to others is the thing that counters that. Another form of burnout is feeling a reduced sense of value. And that really can be helped by helping others actually, or finishing a product or taking some kind of action that allows you to feel your own agency. My own burnout typically arises and manifests in feeling alone in a battle. And so it's important to lead with the importance of connection, which is something that we're doing today. The fourth thing I want to highlight is viewing emotions as signposts. There's a wonderful psychologist, Dr. Susan David, and she talks a lot about naming emotions, but also reflecting on what they're telling us. We can view them as signposts that suggest the next best action for ourselves or our teams. So for example, if we're feeling angry or upset, maybe it's because our values are being challenged, right? And maybe our next best action is to step toward those values in response. So for me, when I get angry or upset, one of the things that tends to trigger me is when I don't feel others are being authentic, right? And when I understand that value is being challenged, that helps me rise to the occasion and lean into my own value and see if I can get others to meet me there. So I think that in addition to creating the psychological safety of talking about these things, saying it's okay not to be okay, naming it, explaining it, talking to each other about it, supporting each other in these ways, we can also see these as clues as to what we need and what our teams need. And the last thing I want to say, the fifth thing, is how important it is to be compassionate to yourself throughout all of this so you can be compassionate to others. My baking story is a great example of not being compassionate to myself. And if you struggle with self-compassion and you're very hard on yourself, which I certainly am, it's important to ask yourself what a kind, wise, or brave friend would recommend and try to channel that inner voice instead of the more judgmental inner voices that we might feel. Self-compassion is not self-indulgent. Self-compassion is the prerequisite to you being a compassionate leader to others. It is absolutely necessary to your own resilience. I came to this realization rather late in life, and it's the best piece of advice I can give you, is to remember your own well-being is the starting point to fostering vitality in others. So I want to shift to Q&A on this theme of helping each other. And I just want to thank you all very much for coming together today to have a conversation like this. It's wonderful to support each other today, but also every day.
Great. And thank you, Katya. You gave us a great deal to think about, to pause and reflect on about ourselves, how we are coming to work, how we are acting and operating at home, and as models for our children and everyone around us. So thank you sincerely for that. As I listened to you, one of the things that struck me was this challenge with feeling like you have to be perfect, as you shared in your opening story. There is a concept of toxic positivity. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about toxic positivity and its negative impacts on us.
Oh, I love that question. So thank you. So first of all, let me define what toxic positivity is. And it's actually, again, Dr. Susan David, who I mentioned earlier, she coined the term. And the best way to explain toxic positivity is to give you an example that we've probably all been through. If we've been to kind of like a bad workshop. And that is, have you ever done the exercise where someone tells you to write on one side of a piece of paper everything that you're worried about and concerned about, and to sort of like air everything that is weighing on you? And then someone says, okay, now turn over the piece of paper and write everything you should be grateful for. And that's toxic positivity, because toxic positivity is erasing what you are concerned about or fearful of or wrestling with, and telling you that that's not acceptable. We've got to like buck up and rally and just think positive. And this sounds paradoxical, but you end up in a more positive place. You end up in a more resilient place if you acknowledge the difficulty of what we're all going through. It actually makes you stronger. It actually makes you more resilient, and it actually makes you more positive over time. But you can't skip over the work of acknowledging and working through what we're all going through. And so I like to think of this sort of paradox, right? You have to acknowledge how hard things are, but keep optimism about the future. But you can't skip to optimism without acknowledging where you are.
Absolutely, great point. And it makes sense because it's too common to try and close things off instead of acknowledging and then moving forward. Great insight. Thank you. Now, one of the other suggestions that you made that I really appreciated was being open and honest in sharing how you're feeling with others, leading by example, if you will, to help others be able to do the same. Do you have any suggestions for how women who aren't leaders yet can influence others upwards and maybe in their leadership teams?
Yeah, I think that that's a great question, because I'm sure some people, if they listen to me talk like this, might think, well, easy for you to say. Like you're in a place where you can come across as vulnerable and that's okay, but that may not be okay for everyone. Or there might not be psychological safety in every environment that makes that possible. And I really want to acknowledge that. And so one of the tips I will give you for advocating and managing up that really worked for me, particularly earlier in my career, was, especially as a woman, was talking about all of these things in the context of what was needed to make the team stronger or drive outcomes more effectively. I'm often uncomfortable sometimes, believe it or not, talking about myself or advocating for myself or talking about my own needs. I've tried to, counter that by how I show up today. But that's a very real feeling. Women do really well when they make it about the collective and the greater good and the bigger reason that we're all here. So if you're struggling to figure out how to have a conversation about what's needed, or you need to advocate for something, or you're trying to go into vulnerable territory, I encourage you to frame it in how that's needed to make a group of people stronger, or for you to make a contribution to that team level or corporate level endeavor. And that's hard for someone to criticize, and it kind of creates a certain level of psychological safety that can help you show up in an authentic way without feeling like you're making everything about yourself or subjecting yourself to too much risk.
Great advice and great example. Thank you very much. And last question, can you share some examples of how you as a leader help your team boost their vitality at work?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is to model talking about the importance of vitality. So the conversation we had today is a great example, but I make a point of asking in one-on-ones with my leaders and in group settings, asking my team how they are, no, really, how are they? And trying to normalize the conversation about talking about what state folks are in, what they need to be successful, and model myself that it's okay to be honest in those answers. So sometimes I will talk about how things are going for me to open the door for others to talk about how they're doing as well. And that starts to create an environment where you can even have the conversation. Because if you can't have the conversation and no one feels comfortable talking about these issues of what's needed for our overall well-being, then you're brushing it under the rug. And I just don't think, given the state of affairs right now in the world, with people's anxiety and depression and mental health and the strain that working women are under, we have to make space to have those conversations. That's the single most important thing to do. The second is, though, not to just sort of have this attitude of, okay, well, we're just going to let it all hang out and everyone's going to talk about it and then we're all going to move on. So you don't want to have the toxic positivity, but you also want to take it seriously, but you want to have real takeaways. Like, what can we do for each other? What are we going to do about this? Because sometimes it's dangerous to ask someone what they need and do nothing about it. It's worse than if you never asked at all. So I'd say, in addition to creating an environment where you can have these conversations, I think another really important thing to do is to have a game plan for what are some actionable things that can be done to really support each other, whether it's access to mental health benefits or financial planning tools or other things that increase our vitality, or any other number of programs. It's important to put some actual substance behind the conversations.
Absolutely great advice. So thank you so much for being an absolutely phenomenal keynote speaker. Now, before we introduce our next keynote speaker, we want to take just a brief moment to share information about a nonprofit organization I mentioned earlier who does phenomenal work with girls and youth around the world. Code.org is a nonprofit organization dedicated to expanding access to computer science in schools and increasing participation by young women and students from underrepresented groups. They're the leading provider of K-12 computer science curriculum in the largest school districts in the United States, and their courses are available in more than 67 languages and used in more than 180 countries. Their annual Hour of Code campaign has engaged more than 15% of all students around the world. At the end of our event today, we'll encourage you to visit the Code.org website to learn more about this phenomenal organization and their mission. So as a sneak peek into Code.org and their mission, we're excited to share a quick video with you.
I think it's really important for girls to study computer science. I think for a long time, the world thought that some things were for boys and some things were for girls, and everyone understands now that boys and girls can have equal opportunity.
If we could just, support girls and give them that initial encouragement, that we can start balancing the scales, and then we won't even have to play with the equation because it will just be a natural flow.
To be able to code gives you the freedom to build anything. And that is just so empowering.
I like having that power in my own hands to express what's in my imagination using programming.
Just the experience of programming gives you access to a new method of thinking. Everything becomes the steps that you can take towards a solution, and that is just extremely valuable.
It's one thing to use software. It's a totally different thing to get to change how the software you use actually works.
Yeah, all of my favorite memories from computer science are actually programming together with teams. I don't think CS is a solo thing. Nothing is. If you want to build something amazing, you usually have to do it in a team, and CS is no different.
You all live in a time where expressing yourself, learning about different people, making a business, and a real difference in your communities is all totally possible. With computers, it's right at your fingertips.
It's not about being a girl or being a boy. It's about being talented. Computer science needs more talented people who are not afraid of being creative and making the world a better place.
Jump into it, learn, just try and take one class, give it 1 hour. It's amazing what you can learn in 1 hour.
And that's what's so exciting about Hour of Code. All of you were able to participate from all parts of the country, at all ages, from all different backgrounds. And that's what will create the right opportunities for everyone.
Every girl deserves to take part in creating the technology that will change our world and change who runs it. I challenge girls in every single country to learn 1 hour of code.
Technology touches every part of our lives. So if you can change technology, you can change the world.
Good afternoon, everyone. That was a tremendous session with Donna and Katya, and I really took a few things away, so I'm appreciative of that. Welcome. I'm Lauren Sallata, for those of you who don't know me. And before I introduce our next special guest, I want to share a few very interesting, important Ricoh stats about our diversity efforts. 40% of our United Negro College Fund scholarships went to women of color. 31% of our interns were women, and 67% of those same interns were offered permanent employment were women. 73% of Ricoh scholarship recipients are women, and collectively, women-owned businesses revenue through our Supplier Diversity Alliance experienced a 66% year-over-year growth from calendar year 21 to 22. So great effort and work by our team members driving this important activity. And on behalf of the EMT, we say thank you. So now I am thrilled to introduce a powerhouse of a woman leader joining us today. Our next guest is no stranger at the White House and on Capitol Hill. She has designed and executed bipartisan legislative and political strategies on issues such as competitiveness, trade, tax, and technology. She currently holds the role of Senior Vice President for Political and Industry Affairs for the Consumer Technology Association. You may best know the CTA as the force behind the Consumer Electronics Show. However, I can share that they are so much more than that. They are an important voice on all issues regarding communication and technology policy, and they are advocates for not only innovation, but for diversity and inclusion in technology. Our guest has been just such a voice with them since 2016. In her leadership role, she is committed to using all avenues possible to advance positive change and inclusion in the tech industry. And some of these include an impressive commitment that she secured from the CTA of $10 million from VCs to specifically support women entrepreneurs, development of a diverse K-12 STEM pipeline, and engagement with allied organizations and member companies to create a diverse and inclusive tech industry and ecosystem. She is making a difference each and every day. She's here with us today to talk about her journey. Please welcome me and join me in welcoming Tiffany Moore.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you to Ricoh for hosting such an important conversation as we honor women and International Women's Day and celebrate Women's History Month. And what a great keynote by Katya. I loved her remarks on getting to vitality. Incredibly important advice. I've enjoyed learning more about the work that Ricoh is doing to honor women and advance greater gender equity all year round, not just in March and not just today. I especially loved hearing about your work with code.org, which is committed to children, particularly young girls, and making sure that they learn how to code. International Women's Day is an opportunity to celebrate how far women have come, and importantly, we need to acknowledge and challenge us to work much ahead to advance greater gender equity. It is both in our country's fundamental interest and the globe's fundamental interest to make sure that we embrace and provide access for talented women who are helping us change the world. We are stronger and better for it. The research is clear. We develop better solutions and better strategies to tackle the world's greatest challenges when we have women at the table. My career traverses both politics and technology. And women and people of color and those in underrepresented voices, communities are generally not at the table as much as they should. But there's reason to celebrate. We've come a long way, but there's so much more we have to do. And we need to be charged and redouble our efforts to make sure that we advance all voices. You heard a little bit about my career, and I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit more, and importantly, the lessons that I've learned from my mother that have carried me along the way. It'll mark 27 years next month when I moved to Washington, D.C. with a degree in foreign languages and no job, much to my mother's dismay, particularly as the first person in my family to go to college. However, over the course of 27 years, I've had the extraordinary opportunity to serve in a variety of policy roles, including senior legislative advisor for a member of Congress, director of government relations for a Fortune 500 company, and as a political appointee at the Office of the United States Trade Representative. I've also had the opportunity to run my own firm and shape policy for so many companies that are doing great work in Washington. Today, I have the awesome responsibility of serving as Senior VP of Political and Industry Affairs at CTA. I work with some incredible and dynamic women who are advancing technology and innovation every single day. As you've heard, CTA is the leading association for technology companies, and my portfolio focuses on advocacy. I have the honor to represent some of the most exciting tech companies at the White House and in the halls of Congress. And as the leader of the association's diversity initiatives, I also work to amplify and serve as a catalyst to bring more women and diverse voices into the tech and innovation sector. At CTA, we believe every company is a tech company, from big multinational companies to startups that are, creating an incredible opportunity and advancing great policy and solutions for some of our toughest problems. Engaging policymakers with these leaders, women and men who are at the forefront of technology, is an incredible honor that I have, especially in a rapidly changing and diverse tech world. As you heard, we're also known for CES, which is an incredible opportunity. If you ever want your faith restored about how technology is driving solutions, we encourage you to come. And at CES 2023, we had more than 115,000 attendees with over 3,200 exhibitors. I have the pleasure at CES to also organize our diversity initiatives program on site while we're in Las Vegas. So as I mentioned, I really want to talk about some of the lessons that I've learned, particularly from my mother. And so I think I should probably tell you a little bit about her. It is because of her resilience, her sacrifice, her tenacity, and the love of a mother that has shaped me into the woman that I am today. I was born to a single mother in the great but oftentimes challenging city of Detroit, Michigan. And given where I started, I don't think anyone would have imagined that I would be here today as one of your keynote speakers, except maybe my mother. My North Star has always been to make her proud, given the incredible challenges she faced and overcame that have created this extraordinary career journey that I get to talk about today. And I will always honor that. And it is that who I honor today for International Women's Day, through sharing some of the lessons that I've learned from her that have provided a blueprint of how I guide myself here in Washington, D.C. Now, I may not have learned those lessons quickly, or certainly not on the timeline that my mother would have preferred, but I did learn them. So let that be a comfort to many mothers or fathers of teenage daughters who may be participating today. While my journey may be unique, it's certainly no different from the challenges that many of us face in our lives as we navigate and challenge what life throws at us as women, as people of color, and of those from marginalized communities. So lesson 1, an entrepreneurial spirit. My mother worked much of her life as a secretary for an auto supplier in the Detroit area. She had a high school diploma, and while she had a good job, it certainly wasn't enough to make ends meet. So my mother also had a job as a bookkeeper, and she also had her own desktop publishing business. I know that term probably dates a lot of us, but essentially she would type college student dissertations and create presentation slides way before PowerPoint made it easy. She was an entrepreneur by necessity. But out of that came a respect for her creating her own destiny. And those side hustles made sure that we had everything I needed, from school uniforms, school supplies, and some of the things that I wanted. It exposed me at an early age to computers, to DOS, WordPerfect, and the like. And that curiosity would eventually lead me into a career in technology and innovation. It was also an important lesson on the importance of entrepreneurship to be able to chart your own destiny. And I would rely on that lesson as I charted my own career destiny. I remember working at a law firm as a non-lawyer / senior policy advisor. It was a great opportunity coming out of stint of government, but as a non-lawyer, it was oftentimes difficult to navigate. And I usually describe that experience as visiting a nice country. I didn't know the language. It was a nice place to visit, but I didn't want to live there. I had a choice, and I recalled that my mother had been an entrepreneur, and it gave me the courage to venture out and have my own firm, More Consulting, that would allow me to advise clients in a way that kind of met where I was coming from. And I represented some of the top companies, but also startups during that time. And that work fuels me through some of the work that I do at CTA. We, as Lauren mentioned, we have a $10 million fund purely in part of our women volunteer leaders at CTA who wanted to create a fund where we could support venture funds that support women and diverse entrepreneurs. And we've been able to date to invest in incredible funds that are making sure that the next woman is not disadvantaged because she didn't have access to venture capital. Another lesson that I learned is that you're only as strong as your network. As a single mother with a full-time job and her own business, it often made it difficult for my mother to make sure I made it to school, practice, and all the games or the number of activities my mother thrust me in. She definitely would have had me involved in code.org. She understood she couldn't do it on her own, and that's why my mother's network was critical to making sure that a young Tiffany was fed where I needed to be, and most importantly, where I wasn't supposed to be. My mother relied on her best friends, some of which were single mothers as well, to make sure that I did my homework, and that I was importantly, involved the way that she would want while she was at work. This was before cell phones. So I would be able to coordinate rides. She did all of this by, managing an incredible group of friends. And so the lesson that I've learned here is that we don't ever do any of this on our own, and we're stronger by our network. The stronger our network, the more that we can accomplish. And where I'm weak or lacking, I can rely on my personal and professional network to carry me through. I'm fortunate that every position I've held through the gracious network of friends and colleagues has led me to the career that I have today. And so it's important to be intentional and gracious in building your personal and professional networks. I can say we do that at CTA, internally and with our member companies and with organizations such as Global Win and Female Quotient to make sure that we're intentional in creating great networks for women to thrive in. Another lesson I learned from my mother is having vision and action beyond your circumstance and your experience. As I may have mentioned, my mother had a high school degree, but was very intent on me being the first in our family to go to college. She had no guidebook, no one to look for to advice. I tell people I was a smart kid, but not smart enough to get into college, but not smart enough to get a full ride scholarship. So what did my mother do? She wrote for every single scholarship for me. I remember getting into a study abroad program in Japan. It was pretty pricey. My mom said, say yes and we'll figure it out. And that just speaks to my mother's resilience and spirit. And we wrote every single Michigan company for a scholarship. And we were able to cobble it together with $500 checks here and there. But this lesson was critical for me, particularly as I embarked on a major career and change to move to Washington, D.C. Just because I hadn't done it before didn't mean I couldn't do it. And I really just had to have the vision and a belief in myself that I was bigger than my original circumstance and push doubt away. We all, particularly as women, have kind of that same doubt that sabotages us, that tells us, we don't meet every single job qualification, so we're not going to apply. Sometimes our male colleagues don't have those same challenges. But just because a woman has never done it, or a person of color hasn't done it, or no one in your family has done it, don't let that limit you. That's one of the best lessons I learned from my mother. Just as we envision a world with greater gender equity and opportunity for women, please be sure that we're making sure that even though we haven't seen it, that we can achieve it. And so say yes to that promotion. Say yes, please apply for that job. Please create the opportunity that even if it's beyond your circumstance, it is our responsibility to make sure that we're moving forward. An important lesson that I learned from my mother is using adversity as fuel. And I'm no stranger, and I'm sure everyone participating has had some type of adversity that has brought them down. Growing up, my mother certainly didn't have it easy, and the judgment of being a single, unwed mother was more stinging than it is today. In the workplace, she often felt slighted, looked over, and not appreciated. She often had to wonder if perceptions of her affected her ability to get promoted, to get a salary increase, whether it was because she was a woman. She endured nastiness, and she never let it take her out. In fact, she used it as fuel. My career may seem extremely rosy, but it's not without its challenges, and we've all likely had similar experiences. But we can never let it knock us out. I know I can say throughout my career, I've been told what I couldn't do, what I couldn't achieve. I've been asked to get coffee from someone who assumed I could never be leading the meeting. I've been told that I've only gotten a position because I'm a woman or because I'm African American. There are so many things that, again, serves to bring us down. But success in spite of this is always our best answer. Some of the things that we do at CTA, particularly with our Diversity and Inclusion Working Group, is to provide opportunities for us to have those discussions, to provide strategies to address these challenges, and importantly, making sure that we're addressing them head on. As adversity, whether it's in the workplace or because of our upbringing, I know that we're committed to organizations like the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Washington. As a club kid in Detroit, I understood the value of having opportunity and access to a world I didn't understand. So making sure that no matter the adversity, we are still using it as fuel to get to the next level. So I want to leave you with a couple lessons that I've learned along the way that maybe not from my mother, but that I think are important. And the first would be making sure that we don't just survive, that we actually thrive. My mother taught me how to survive, and I've spent the last decade learning how to teach us both how to thrive, moving out of survival mode and into one that is thriving and finding joy, or as Katya describes it, getting to vitality. For all my mother's incredible accomplishments in raising me, she never really allowed herself the space to let down her guard without waiting for the next shoe to drop. And I fear that just surviving stole a lot of her joy. If we think about it, surviving is a defensive posture. Thriving is one of offense and happiness. My challenge to you is let's get to the thriving part and let's find joy and not just make it through. The second would be to embrace who you are and run with it. As a young professional, I was often very timid. I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to stand out. I wore boxy suits, your typical black, gray, and brown, which is typical of Washington. And I wanted to be like everyone else. And then I'm actually honest, I didn't even really want to be seen. It took years for me to see women embracing who they were and breaking through barriers, embracing exactly who they authentically were. I guess, today it's all about, it would be called authenticity. But I was able over the years to kind of harness what my unique vantage point and view were without saying a word. And when I walk into a room, which unfortunately, oftentimes I'm still the only, it says with my presence and also my presence that I'm here and I've got something to say. Lastly, I know we'll talk a little bit about this more, but make sure that you're putting your passion for equity and equality into action. Just as the woman at Ricoh who started this presentation years ago and hosting these wonderful events, she had an idea and she put action behind it. Our actions, they don't need to be grandiose. They can be quite simple. But find a way to support women within your companies, through networking, through recommending a woman, through mentoring a woman, or promoting a woman. It must be an active verb that we all are very much committed to. And with that, I would welcome any questions.
Terrific, Tiffany, amazing. I've admired you and your work for a number of years since I first met you a couple years ago as part of the CTA family. So really appreciate you sharing today. And I know I have a couple of questions that folks might want to hear your answer to. So, clearly your mother was a hugely influential role model for you and friend. And I can certainly relate to that. But have you had other experiences or mentors in the business world that have also helped shape you on your journey?
Yes. So I've often said that, your mentors don't have to look like you. I think our default is that, you need a woman mentor. And that's important. I mean, it's the difference between someone that can sympathize with your circumstance, what you've been through. And so having someone of likeness is helpful. But I think if I look at a 25-year career journey, I've had white men as mentors, Hispanic men, women much older than me that have been incredibly helpful in my career journey. Importantly, I have younger people, individuals I work with that are incredible mentors. I mean, if you look at this next generation, they have incredible fire and a fierce urgency of now, which I learn from daily. And I try my very best not to want to dim that light and try to learn as much as I can. But I do think they kind of force that sense of urgency with a generation that may have been a little bit too comfortable of saying, well, this is the way it was always done, or, there's no way to do that. I appreciate that in mentors, both above me and those that I have an opportunity to work with. So again, I would say your mentor, they don't need to look like you and they don't have to be in the same field. And you don't need to just have one. There is the shared experience that comes with having a woman as a mentor or a person of color, in my case, but there's so much you're missing out on in a world of experiences that can help guide your career journey.
Awesome. Great advice. Great input. Another question, you spoke about moving outside of your comfort zone and having vision beyond your current circumstance. So for those who may be having a hard time raising their hand, whether because of circumstance or temperament or otherwise, what is the number one piece of advice that you might share about not being afraid to take the next step?
Well, I probably would first say, I don't think we can always take away the fear. And so in some instances, it's the fear that fuels you or the fear that you have to put at bay. But, I once read from an incredible book years and years ago that everything you want is just outside of your comfort zone. And so I always try to remember that. And it's not going to be comfortable. And so I think we have to be, okay with, again, raising our hand and stepping out, but also kind of understanding that, it's bigger than just us. And what we do is just not for our individual kind of value or individual promotion, but that we have an entire generation of young women who are looking at us. And so when we take ourselves out of it, then that responsibility can be a great way to kind of get you to step up and step into it. CES is our wonderful show that we have in Las Vegas, and we would encourage you to come. But one of the great things that I appreciate about the organization that I work for is that we wanted to make sure that we were creating a created an opportunity to hear women's voices. If you look at our keynote stages, if you look at the panels, the incredible conference programming that we have at CES, it is geared towards making sure that we're having those pivotal and important conversations about technology, its intersection with innovation, the ability to actually make products that change the world, and making sure that women and people of color and other marginalized groups are part of that solution. I often hear it described as pieces of a puzzle. And we may not think that we matter individually, but if you have pieces of a puzzle and there's one piece missing, the entire puzzle doesn't make sense. You can't have the full view. And so one of the opportunities we have at CES is having those conversations both discreetly within our diversity and inclusion track that highlights women, but also throughout our entire programming to make sure that regardless of the technology or the vertical or what we're talking about, that we have the value of having women and diverse voices as a part of that.
Relative to, so kind of piggybacking off of the CTA question, in addition to your role at CTA, you're also a board chair for the Global Women's Innovation Network. And this is a powerful organization for women who are passionate about innovation. What can you share with us about your experience with this organization?
Well, I'll say, what drew me to the organization is I was on Capitol Hill in the late 90s, and I benefited from having incredible women who would tap me on the shoulder, pull me up, explain things to me, and take me out to lunch and just try to understand kind of, what my career journey was and help me answer questions I just didn't maybe have someone ask. And the thing that I appreciate about Global Win is that it's the intersection of women in policy and innovation, some of the most exciting innovation fields. And we create a very intentional network to make sure that women on the Hill, they can develop their professional network, that they can learn more about policy, that they're really understand that they have people that they can reach out to. They understand what their possible career journeys could be. And they have a network of women who are committed to supporting them. And so that's why Global Win is a special organization, particularly for me. We actually just had an event where we, had hundreds of women on Capitol Hill and in policy, where we celebrated International Women's Day. And it was wonderful to see such a room, standing room only. No one could get in, and it's welcoming because I think when I started on Capitol Hill, those rooms weren't as full. And so to see, almost, more than 20 years later, that there's an incredible network of women on Capitol Hill, of Black women on Capitol Hill. It's encouraging that we know that the next generation of advocates will look much more like what we want to see when it comes to gender equity.
Excellent. I'm not sure if this question was covered while I departed for a few seconds, but what is your experience in political and industry affairs shaped and influenced your view of DE&I in business, or how has it?
So I'll tell you the one things that I often talk to policymakers, and they're very much interested in kind of what the technology sector is doing on D&I to advance, gender equity or, racial equity. And the one thing that I'm also always reminded of is that no one gets it right. No industry has figured it out, particularly not even the federal government. And so it's sobering. It's actually kind of sad, but we have to look to everyone to try to create some of these solutions, and we can't do it by ourselves. So it's partnerships, whether it's through our trade association or working with our member companies, to talk about kind of what works. And the thing that I love about the tech industry is that we will try almost everything. We will show our work and we will tell you, like, that didn't work, but this did. And so what we do within our CTA Diversity and Inclusion Working Group is to have those conversations. What's working for your particular company? What advice do you have for a startup that's trying to build D&I from the ground up? And then what advice does a startup have for larger companies who have had entrenched D&I programs, but want to see a little bit of extra movement or an extra kind of, entrepreneurial spirit in how they implement their programs. So I think we have a lot to learn. The government, again, has some great opportunity as well to make sure that when you're looking at policy roles, when Capitol Hill or within the agencies and departments, we still have a long way to go.
Tiffany, I want to thank you. This has been an incredibly insightful session with you, and thank you for sharing so much. And before I hand it over to Jan Gillespie, I just want to recap the four 3 points that you mentioned. So thrive, not just survive, embrace who you are, and take your passion for equity and inclusion and put it into action. So I think I got them all. Absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, and good luck in all of your endeavors. And I will now turn it over to Jan Gillespie, who is our VP of Marketing Operations for North America. And Jan, take it away.
Thank you, Lauren. And hi, everyone on the call. I'm joining you here from the Ricoh Canada office just outside of Toronto. I just left a really wonderful networking event and luncheon here in the office and had a chance to meet many amazing women and gentlemen that are here today to celebrate International Women's Day. I'll come join you again after the virtual conference, and looking forward to seeing everybody again. Kayla, I really personally loved what you shared about it's okay not to be perfect, and it's okay not to be okay. I too struggle with that and really have a bit of a perfectionism in me. And so that really resonated with me. And I really want to commit to catching myself in the future in those moments when I'm not okay, and just be okay with that. So thank you for bringing that forward. And Tiffany, your mother sounds like a truly amazing role model and a champion for your success. And I really loved how she taught you not to limit yourself just because it hadn't been done before. That was a really important takeaway for me today. So thank you for sharing that. So hopefully you've all noted some great key takeaways from both Katya and Tiffany. Before we go, I just want to share some additional food for thought about how we can all take action today. Consider mentoring a woman or a young girl. You know, we can all give that gift of time, and your expertise and caring are really invaluable. Sharing both personal and professional experiences and helping pave the way for our female colleagues and for the next generation. Second, actively do what you can to help a woman or help girls achieve those ambitions. You know, most people have multiple careers in their lifetime, and oftentimes positive change is sparked by encouragement and just an open door. And some people just need that little push to take that next step. Encourage the women around you to apply for more senior positions in your organization. This is really the best way to combat what's known as the broken rung. And the broken rung refers to the trend that women do not move up from being an individual contributor into a managerial role at the same rate as their male counterparts. So the more women we encourage to become supervisors and managers, the more opportunities they have to become leaders in the organization. So let's build together that pipeline of female leaders for the future. Don't forget to create opportunities to share your own talents as well. Raise your hand and get out there. And for those of us who lead teams, assure our project teams reflect the diverse talent within our organization. Don't just seek the same people you know or the colleagues that you know are really notable and first that come to your mind. Be purposeful when selecting those team members. As always, we have the opportunity to make a real difference through advocacy and action. And when you personally choose to embrace equity, your actions impact progress for our global society. So with that, I would like to pass it back to Michael for some final thoughts. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jan. And hey, this has been absolutely incredible. Thank everyone that's participated, all the folks behind the scenes. Thank you, Donna, Jan, and Lauren for your active participation today. And most importantly, thank you, Katya and Tiffany, for saying yes. Thank you for preparing, and thank you for delivering. We are definitely inspired and encouraged and have lots of takeaways. You know, I would, in addition, we'd like to really thank the audience for taking the time to invest and to attend today's event and keeping a keen focus on how we come together to drive positive change for women, girls, and all gender expansive people. Before you go, we'd like for you to take a few minutes to scan the QR code on the screen and tell us what you thought about today's event. We would absolutely take your feedback to heart, and your responses will help us shape future Ricoh events. Thank you again for joining and celebrating today and on our International Women's Day, Women's History Month. Together, let's all embrace equity for today, tomorrow, and forever. Thank you.
One day, when a woman can get the same start as a man, can bring home the same paycheck, can be represented as much in her government, can get her turn to be in charge, then she'll look back at what you're doing today and say, thank you.